Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. I've got an MSI GS65 here, Stealth 85G, I don't know, one of these MSI gaming laptops. I like these laptops, but whatever. Anyway, so this one came in and it has no backlight. So model number to be exact is an MS-16Q4. So yeah, this has got no backlight. And the customer already took a look because they looked it up and they found another YouTube video from another well-known repair guy who had noted that the backlight filter had gone bang. And when the customer took the back cover off their laptop and went to inspect, they discovered the same thing. So this is going to be quite a straightforward repair, hopefully, because the hard work has already been done for us. So just a visual inspection of the motherboard will reveal the fault here. And I'll just spin this around. If we look down by the display connector down here, I'll just pull the microscope in. So down next to the display connector here, you can see our problem quite clearly. This guy has exploded. So let's take a deeper look into this and find out what has happened to it and how we can fix it. So we've got a blown backlight filter inductor. So what is this doing? Well, this is the main power rail coming into the backlight of the display connector, which you can see on the right here. And it's probably a bit easier to visualize this if we have a look at the schematic for this. So this motherboard is an MS-16Q41, and through the miracle of bad caps, we have a schematic for it. So here is our schematic, and we want to look at the display connector area. So if we look at the functional block diagram here, you can see here we've got the EDP connector going to the EDP panel, and that's on page 41. So I'm just going to bash in 41 here. So here's our EDP connector, our display connector. So let's zoom in on this, and up the top here you can see we've got power SRC, so power screen, coming in to the top two pins of the display connector, and that goes through this inductor here, L2. So this is a ferrite filter. There's also two capacitors on the line as well before it hits the display connector. So what does L2 do? Why is this here? So this guy serves a couple of different functions. Normally, the purpose of an inductor, also known as a coil or a choke, is to resist changes in current. So one possible purpose for this is to just act as a shock absorber on the power rail and just suddenly just soften any sudden changes in current. And this is commonly seen at, this is often seen at power inputs, just as a method of just smoothing out the incoming power a bit, just so if the load suddenly takes an enormous gulp of current, there is just that bit of buffer in the inductor just to release some energy. And if suddenly the load bangs from 0 to 100, it just stops that shock from just going up the power line and possibly damaging the and upsetting things further up the chain. But this is a very small inductor. It's tiny. It's actually more known as a ferrite bead, and it's not really doing this job. What this guy is doing is acting as a high-frequency filter. And so, again, like a normal inductor, it resists changes in current, but it's doing this for only high-frequency stuff. So instead of measuring this in microhenries, as you normally would for an inductor, we're looking at the resistance at a specific frequency. So what that means is that if noise on the line, so ripple on the line, gets to a certain frequency, like 100 megahertz, it will offer a specific resistance to that, thus filtering it out or preventing it from passing through. And this prevents high frequency noise on the power rail from getting through to the display. And this might, it might help reduce flicker, or it might help reduce potential damage to the display. Now, according to some of the gurus on bad caps, this is not super critical, and technically we could just bridge this out. We could just solder blob across it. But that's not really an ideal fix for two reasons. Is that, number one, it is there to filter high frequency noise, but also number two, the other role that this is doing is it's serving as a fuse as well. The fact that this has gone bang means that there was a high power event here. Something made this explode, and we want to know what that is. But we'll get to that in a moment. So technically we could, if we weren't able to get hold of one of these, we could just replace it with a 2 amp fuse instead, which is what a lot of other laptops or MacBooks would have. They would have a backlight fuse that would go there. However, I have managed to find a replacement, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Before we just blindly replace this component, we have to ask ourselves the bigger question of, why did it explode? Because we can't just replace this with something else, because there's a good chance that that might just explode as well. So what happened here? Why did this thing go bang? So what I'm going to do, I'll put my multimeter into resistance mode, and we're just going to have a probe and see if the backlight rail is shorted. So I'll put my black probe on this screw hole for ground, and we'll just check both sides of this melted inductor. And on one side, we've got high resistance. This is probably the main power rail. So that's like 23, 22 plus kilo ohms. That's lots. So there's no short circuit there. So what about the other side? Well, the other side is shorted to ground. So that's why this has exploded, is that its output is shorted. Now, remember, if we look at the schematic again, L2 does not connect directly to ground. Remember Jessa Jones from iPad Rehab? It's never the coil. And what she means by that is the coil itself doesn't have a path to ground, so it cannot be the cause of the fault. It's the symptom of the fault. So something else is shorting us to ground, because this does not connect to ground. However, these capacitors, these do connect to ground. And also, our display is going to connect to ground. So something else has gone short circuit and it has pulled it to ground, and the inrush of current has exceeded what this can manage and exploded it. So this thing is probably rated for about, it's probably rated for 3 amps actually, because it's got 3A there. So there was probably a power event that exceeded 3 amps and just demolished this guy. It just exploded. So firstly, what I really want to know is the display shorted? Because if the display is shorted, that means I need a new screen in this thing as well, which is going to suck. So we can easily check for this just by disconnecting the display. So I'll just unplug the display there, and we'll just see if the short disappears. If the short disappears now, it means that the display is shorted, or probably the LCD panel, or the backlight in the LCD panel. So with the display disconnected, are we still shorted? Yes, we are. So there's a very good chance that the display is absolutely fine. So that's good news. The other news as well is that the customer tells me that there is a picture on the screen, just no backlight. So that also infers to us that the display is probably okay. So the only other two guys that are left are these two capacitors. So what about these guys? Do they look okay? From this angle, they look okay. But what if we looked real close for a sec? Wah, 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 wah. That'll do it. So we've got a scorch mark on the side of the display connector. That was probably from the inductor going nuclear. But that capacitor, that's a nice hole in the side of that. That was definitely not the inductor bursting into flames that put that hole there. So this capacitor has failed and gone short circuit. That's pulled the backlight rail to ground, and then it's blown up the filter inductor. So we need a new capacitor and a new filter inductor. If we switch back to the schematic here, we can look at these two capacitors and we can see that one of them is, let's see, capacitor 10U, so that's probably 10 microfarads, which will be UF, and that is 0805. So it's a 10 microfarad 0805 capacitor, which is exactly what we're seeing on the board. The other one that was next to it is a small boy, that's an 0402, and that is a 100 nanofarad. So remember from recent videos I've done, like the MacBook repair, where I just made random guesses at the capacitor, and I said you usually see 10 microfarad with a 100 nanofarad next to it. It's always the same. So as you can see from here, well, it's not always the same, but as you can see, there's very often those two pairs, a 100 nanofarad, so 0.1 microfarads, and a 10 microfarad capacitor acting as filtering on a big power rail. So we're going to need a 10 mic capacitor, and we're going to need a filter. Now, the capacitor is super easy. I keep 10 microfarad capacitors in stock because it's such a common failure point. But that inductor is going to be a little bit trickier. I could probably source one from China, but I've already had a look on eBay and could not really see anything super promising. So what I thought I'd do instead is raid my breaker pile, and most of my donor boards are MacBook boards. And old MacBook boards can be, this is an ancient MacBook Air board like 2011 or something irrelevant like that. These can be great donor boards because the MacBook logic boards are so well documented that we've got really good schematics and board views for them. And that means it's really easy to find parts on these and know where they are and take them off these boards. So I had a look around on the back of this logic board for some small inductors that looked about the right kind of size, just ballparking. And I found some that are a little bit on the large side, but that's probably not a bad thing. That just means that they'll have decent current ratings on them because it's easier to make bigger components than smaller ones. So all of these little black dudes here, the brown guys are all capacitors, but these black guys are inductors. So let's look these up and see what rating they are. This board is an 820-2838, and so if I zoom down on here, you can see here are those little inductors. So we've got L2575, L2567, and so on. So I'm just going to look these up on the schematic. Because I'm running Flex Board View, I can just right-click and search. As a side note, there's now a free version of Flex Board View available. It doesn't have this little integration here to be able to right-click and search and immediately jump to that point on the schematic. But if you like Flex Board View's visual layout and all of the extra notes that it can have available, then there is a free version available for it. So check that out at pldaniels.com. So these inductors here are 220 ohm, 2.2 amps. Now 2.2 amps should be big enough to take the grunt of the backlight, I would say. So that should be high enough. The resistance rating, that is 220 ohms at 100 megahertz. According to the big brains at Badcaps, the inductor on the laptop is probably a 600 ohm because apparently those have been becoming more and more common in recent times. However, because this is not really essential, it doesn't matter if the rating is not that high. The higher this resistance rating is, the better the filtering is. However, it's okay if we put in a low rated one, we just need it to exist. So 220 ohms would be absolutely fine. The only question is whether 2.2 amps is going to be high enough. But I'm going to roll the dice on that and see how we go. When we test this laptop, I'll probably just do a quick touch test or a thermal cam test on the inductor if it's working, just to make sure that it's not running really hot and potentially fatiguing itself. The actual inductor itself is bigger than the original one, so hopefully that should mean it's got enough thermal mass and bulk to take the strain. So I'm going to rip one of these guys off and put it onto our MSI board, and then we're also going to swap out that capacitor there. Now we're really close up to this display connector and I really don't want to damage that, so we're going to try and do this with no hot air. So I might be a little bit janky while I'm trying to be a soldering iron hero, but here goes nothing. Right, I've just turned the laptop around just so I've got better access with my right hand without clipping that display connector. And I'm just going to flux up that area and just wet the joins just so things come off a little bit easier. And I'm going to be using a dual-wield technique because I don't have hot tweezers, which would be really good right now. However, I'm just going to come in and we're just going to put some fresh solder on that cap. And I'm just going to flux up that area and just wet the joins just so things come off a little bit easier. And I'm going to be using a dual-wield technique because I don't have hot tweezers, which would be really good right now. However, I'm just going to come in and we're just going to put some fresh solder on that cap. And I'm just going to flux up that area and just wet the joins just so things come off a little bit easier. The filter's not really an issue. That's just a solder blob at this point, so that'll come off super easily. There we go. Right, now here comes the Pro Strats. Two soldering irons, one for each side. Whoop. That's that guy dealt with. And I'm just going to come in with the chisel and just go... Oh. That was anticlimactic. Alright. More solder it is. Oh my god. Chisel, please. There we go. Be gone. It still feels like there's something there, so I'm going to come in with the knife edge in a minute and just clean all of that up. Firstly, we're going to do a little bit of a spot check with the multimeter again and just see if our short has disappeared. Now that capacitor is off the board, we should find that we're no longer shorted. So, black probe on the screw hole. So the input side wasn't shorted in the first place, but we'll just verify that. Yep, lots of resistance there. And now the output side. Yeah, that's also no longer shorted. We're getting like mega ohms out of range there because there's basically nothing else on that rail except that capacitor now. Cool. Right, let's come in with more flux and the wick, and we'll just wick these pads down and clean up. Right, there's a little peg sticking up from the input side there that's got me a little bit worried because I'm not sure if that's a chunk of the inductor or if it's a damaged pad. Neither would surprise me, but let's just pull up all of this solder and then we can clean up and actually get a good look at the area. Right, what's your deal? Oh yeah, no, that is just a bit of the inductor that's still hanging on. All right, let's give that. I'll give that a bit of GBH. There we go. I think that got it. There we go. Lovely. Excellent. So we've cleaned up the area and we've got nice empty pads now. So we're ready to come in with our new inductor and our new capacitor. In case anyone's wondering, PC233, that's this guy here, that's a no stuff. And we could tell because before we wicked it all down, the pads were little bumps like these. And that is where no stuff means that there is a space for it on the board. There is a footprint for it. And solder has been applied there. But the part was never intended to be fitted. It is deliberately no stuffed. No stuff has been put there. And you can tell that something is a no stuff because you get these perfect bumps of solder where there is a solder blob there, but nothing has ever been in it. If a component has been knocked off the board, then the pad will be flat, or it'll have a divot in it, or it'll have a crater or something where you can see that a component was seated there. But a perfect little bump like these guys, that's no stuff, so we don't need to worry about that. Right, I'm going to put some flux on our boy to retrieve. And I will wet the edges on both sides of it just to make sure it comes off the board a bit easier. We're on the back of the CPU or the PCH, not sure which. We're on the back of the PCH here. So there's quite a lot of ground planes here, and this guy's going to put up a fight. So I just want to make it as easy as possible to remove. So we'll just nah. There we go. Bleh. There we go. Just blob some solder on both sides. Now we can hot air this guy off the board, so here comes the hot air. Nice. Nice and easy. No fuss, no drama. Oh, looks like that's about the right size, actually. And we'll just put some solder on one pad. There we go. Clean the iron. Flow this guy in. Trying to get it nice and straight. Balls. I'm going to put down some more flux there. There we go. That's nice. And a dab of solder on the other side. Bit more solder. That's not on properly. There we go. That didn't move when I nudged one side of it that time. Right, now let's get our new capacitor in place. So same deal, I'm just going to touch some solder onto one pad. And there's our new capacitor. Damn it. Tweezers, please. There we go. Right, I am going to turn the board around. And come in from that direction so I can just touch that pad. That'll do. Not immaculately straight, but I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. And turn around again. Right, and I'm just going to flux and flow those one last time. Just to try and get a nice finish on the solder joints. There. Okay. Now let's clean up. So let's connect up the display. And I'll just do one more check to make sure that we're not shorted. No problems there. So I'll connect the battery back up and we'll see if it works. Hopefully the battery's got some charge in it and save me having to find the charger. Right, I've just gone and fetched the charger. Charger is plugged in. Let's power that on. There we go. We've got a power light this time. And there it is. One backlit MSI logo. Can I catch BIOS in time? No, we're going into Windows. That's fair. Good. So that is a solid repair, and I'm very happy with that one. So I did mention about checking if the inductor might be running a little bit hot because we put in a 2.2 amp inductor replacing the 3 amp inductor that was originally in there. However, this isn't really going to be a concern because remember, the screen is powered from the main power rail of the laptop, which means it could be running at up to 19.5 volts. So let's round that up to 20. And remember, we've put in a 2.2 amp fuse. So if we assume 2 amps, 20 volts times 2, that means 40 watts of power handling there, plus a bit extra because we're actually running at 19.5 and we've got 2.2 amps in there. So we've got like 40, 45 watts there. There's no way that a laptop LCD is using more power than that. And if there is more than 45 watts going into the screen, we should probably blow that guy open. So that's not something I'm going to worry about. Past that, we've got a good fix there. I was a little bit worried when this one came in because while it was very obvious that we had an exploded inductor, you must always ask yourself the question, why did the thing explode? Because an inductor doesn't have a path to ground, so why did it blow up? In this case, we found a failed capacitor, and you might say to yourself, well, why did the capacitor blow up then? That's because that's what capacitors do. We've got a ceramic capacitor and it's in a laptop where it's getting bumped about and flexed all the time, and you get micro fractures that form inside the capacitor, and as soon as those micro fractures form, you can get voltage breakdown between the plates of the capacitor, and then that voltage breakdown turns into a short, and then the short blows a hole in the side of the capacitor. So it's a pretty routine operation at this point to start replacing those. And the inductor, that blew open because it essentially did the same job that a fuse did. And theoretically probably resulted in less damage to the rest of the laptop. Hopefully anyway. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you as always to my patrons, my channel members, my Twitch subscribers, and everyone else. See you next time. Bye.